The moment I hit send, my hands trembled, my breath uneven as though I'd just unleashed a storm I couldn't control. The email was concise, damning, and impossible to misconstrue. Subject line: about her. Recipient: him. The man she called her friend, but never mentioned without deflecting. The one who lived in that city she just had to visit more frequently this past year. The one whose subtle online presence I only noticed after I'd begun looking for cracks in our picture-perfect marriage. I didn't include unnecessary details, just enough to expose the truth. By the time her angry call lit up my phone screen, I was already staring at the suitcase I'd packed for her. It sat by the front door, her name glaring back at me on the luggage tag I'd once teased her about for its gaudy design. Her voice blared through the phone when I answered. "What the hell did you do?" I didn't respond immediately. I just listened to her accusations, layered with desperation and rage. She wasn't denying anything, just spewing venom because I'd shattered the cozy narrative she'd built for herself. "You had no right." "I had every right," I interrupted, my voice cold and unyielding. "Because you're my wife, and I've spent the past year living a lie you created." Her silence was brief but deafening. Then came the words that would replay in my mind for weeks. "You don't know the whole story. This is your fault." I ended the call without responding. What struck me wasn't her deflection or her refusal to apologize. It was the chilling realization that the woman I thought I knew inside and out was a stranger. A stranger who had spent months deceiving me while convincing me it was all in my head. And I had just made sure her carefully spun web of lies unraveled in the most spectacular way possible. It started small, as these things often do. At first, I dismissed her behavior as the stress of work. She was a writer, after all, a freelance journalist who thrived on deadlines and creative chaos. But her research trips to a city 3 hours away started to feel more like excuses than necessities. "I need to immerse myself," she'd said the first time. "This piece requires me to be on the ground, observing." I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She'd always been ambitious, passionate about her work. But then, the trips became more frequent. A weekend turned into 4 days, then a week. I didn't say anything at first, convincing myself I was being overly sensitive. Until the excuses started to fray at the edges. She would come back distant, her conversations peppered with vague anecdotes that felt rehearsed. I asked about the story she was working on, hoping to connect. "Oh, it's nothing exciting," she'd say, brushing me off. "Just a boring piece about urban development." The enthusiasm I knew so well in her voice was gone. I tried to ignore the growing unease until her location betrayed her for the first time. She'd forgotten to turn off the Find My app we used when traveling separately. I was at work, casually checking her location as I sometimes did when she traveled. Instead of her hotel, the dot blinked over a suburban neighborhood, far from the downtown area where she claimed to be staying. My heart sank, but I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe she had an interview there. Maybe she got lost. I called her. No answer. I texted her. Read. No reply. Hours later, she responded with a casual excuse. "Sorry, my phone died while I was at the archives." The next morning, I searched for the address on her location history. A house, not an archive or an office. The first real crack in the foundation of our marriage. I didn't confront her immediately. I didn't want to accuse her without proof. Instead, I started paying attention, piecing things together in silence. The man entered the picture 2 weeks later. Scrolling through her social media, I noticed subtle interactions I hadn't before. She'd liked several of his posts. Pictures of coffee shops, books, sunsets over a city skyline. He'd liked hers too, always with a comment just intimate enough to raise suspicion. "Another beautiful shot. Your eye for detail is unmatched. That's the book I was telling you about. So glad you're enjoying it." I clicked on his profile. A clean-shaven man with a confident smile and too many posts about *, finding your passion. Asterisk, he lived in the same city as her research trips. I didn't need much time to connect the dots. They were reading the same books, dining at the same restaurants, and visiting the same places, always within days of each other. The next piece of evidence came by accident. Her bag tipped over while she was getting ready to leave for yet another trip. I bent down to help and noticed a receipt from a restaurant I didn't recognize. 2 entrees. 2 glasses of wine. Friday night? I asked, holding it up. I thought you said you were working late that night. Her face froze, just for a moment. Then, she laughed it off. Oh, that's from lunch with a source. You know how these things go. I nodded, pretending to believe her. But in that moment, my trust in her shattered completely. I began to unravel everything. Her social media, her email, her schedule. Every thread I pulled revealed another inconsistency. She wasn't staying at hotels. She was staying with him. She wasn't working late. She was out with him. Even her choice of clothing changed. Less casual, more deliberate. She'd even started wearing perfume she'd never worn before. And the final confirmation came when I created a fake account and messaged him. Posing as a potential collaborator for one of his passion projects, I casually steered the conversation toward her. His response was immediate and all the proof I needed. Yeah, she's incredible. We've been spending a lot of time together. She's mentioned wanting to move here eventually. My blood ran cold. I couldn't believe how much of my life I'd spent blind to her lies. This wasn't just a fling or an accident. It was calculated. Every trip, every excuse, it was all designed to keep me in the dark while she built a life with someone else. And now I had proof. I waited until her next trip, knowing she'd planned another weekend research escape. She kissed me goodbye at the door, suitcase in hand, her smile perfectly composed, like she had nothing to hide. Don't work too hard while I'm gone, she said lightly. I smiled back, suppressing the bile rising in my throat. I won't. Safe travels. The moment her car pulled out of the driveway, I began. I opened my laptop, accessed her forgotten email account, one she hadn't used in years, or so she thought, and found the thread I'd uncovered days earlier. There they were, messages filled with confessions, plans, and promises. She wrote about the challenges of her marriage, painting me as inattentive and emotionally distant. She lamented how hard it was to sneak away without arousing suspicion. But the worst part, she called him her safe place, the one she could be truly herself with. By the time she'd reached her destination, I'd drafted the email to him. Subject line: You deserve the truth. I laid it all out, the evidence, her lies, everything she'd been hiding from both of us. No anger, no threats, just the raw, unvarnished facts. I hit send and closed my laptop, my hands trembling as adrenaline coursed through me. When her name lit up my phone screen hours later, I knew the storm had arrived. I answered, letting her angry tirade wash over me. What the hell did you do? She shouted. You had no right, to involve him in this. I had every right, I said calmly. He deserved to know the truth, just like I did. Her breathing was heavy on the other end of the line, anger boiling over. You think this makes you the hero? You've violated my privacy, my life. Do you even hear yourself? I forced myself to stay composed, though her words cut deeper than I cared to admit. Privacy? You're talking about privacy? You've spent the last year lying to me, sneaking around behind my back, and now you're mad that I exposed the truth. You don't understand, she spat, her voice shaking. It's not what you think. He's just a friend. Stop lying, I interrupted, my voice hardening. I know about the house, the trips, the emails. I know everything, so don't insult me by pretending it's innocent. There was a long pause, heavy and suffocating. When she finally spoke, her tone shifted, dipping into something softer, almost pleading. You don't know what it's been like, she whispered. I've felt so alone. You're always so busy, so focused on your work. I didn't mean for this to happen, but... Don't, I snapped, cutting her off. Don't you dare put this on me. I've been here. I've supported you. I've loved you. And this is how you repay me. Her voice rose again, defensive and indignant. I needed something more. You don't get it. You never tried to understand me. And now you're destroying everything over some paranoid fantasy. Fantasy, I repeated, laughing bitterly. You've been caught, and this is the best you can come up with? I've seen the proof. You've been building a life with him behind my back, planning your future while using me as your safety net. Her silence spoke volumes. Finally, she said, I never wanted to hurt you. But you did, I replied coldly. And now you're angry because I won't let you control the narrative anymore. The confrontation dragged on for hours, a toxic cocktail of anger, guilt, and half-hearted justifications. She confessed only to the things I could prove, denying or minimizing anything else. It wasn't physical, she insisted. We just connected emotionally. It was never supposed to be more than that. Do you think that makes it better? I asked. That you didn't cross some imaginary line? You betrayed me, whether it was physical or not. Her voice broke then, the first sign of true emotion. I didn't know how to fix us. I didn't know how to tell you I was unhappy. And instead of talking to me, you turned to him, I said. You made your choice. And now I'm making mine. After I hung up the phone, the silence in the house pressed down on me like a suffocating weight. It was too quiet, too still, and for the first time, I truly felt the absence of what our relationship had once been. Her words echoed in my mind, each one a sharp dagger twisting deeper. I didn't know how to fix us. I needed something more. You don't understand. I sank onto the couch, staring blankly at the suitcase I'd packed for her. It sat by the door like an ominous monument to the destruction of our marriage. The emotions hit me all at once: anger, grief, confusion, and, embarrassingly, a flicker of guilt. Had I been too focused on work? Too distant? Too caught up in my own life to notice hers falling apart? But no. I shook my head, rejecting the spiral of self-blame she had tried to plant in my mind. This wasn't about me. She had made a choice, a selfish, calculated choice, and no amount of introspection would change that fact. 4 hours, I sat there, replaying our life together like a cruel highlight reel. I remembered the first time I saw her, sitting at a cafe with her hair pulled into a messy bun, her nose buried in a book. The way she smiled when she caught me staring, half shy, half amused. I remembered our wedding day, how her laugh echoed through the room when her heel got caught in her dress as we danced. We were so happy then, so sure of each other. And I remembered the small, quiet moments. Mornings spent in bed with coffee and lazy conversations, evenings when we'd sit on the porch and watch the sunset in companionable silence. Were all those memories tainted now? Had she been lying to me even then? Or had she simply stopped loving me somewhere along the way, and I'd been too blind to see it? The questions were endless, circling my mind like vultures. I tried to rationalize her actions, to make sense of the person she'd become. But every time I thought I'd reached some understanding, the anger would rise again, hot and blinding. She had no right to rewrite our story this way. No right to paint me as the neglectful husband, to justify her betrayal with hollow excuses. I had been there for her, always. I had loved her, trusted her, and in return, she had treated me like a backup plan. I stood up abruptly, the need for action overtaking my spiraling thoughts. I couldn't sit here drowning in memories any longer. I grabbed her suitcase, opened the front door, and set it outside on the porch. A symbolic gesture, perhaps, but it felt significant. Her things didn't belong in this house anymore. She didn't belong in this house anymore. The rest of the night passed in a haze. I poured myself a drink, then another, and stared at the phone, half expecting her to call again. She didn't. At one point, I thought about driving to her hotel, confronting her in person, making her look me in the eye and explain herself. But what was the point? I'd already heard her excuses, her justifications. I knew there would be no closure, no satisfying resolution. Instead, I sat there, letting the weight of her betrayal settle over me. It was heavy, suffocating, but not unbearable. Not yet. Because beneath the pain, beneath the anger, there was something else brewing: clarity. By the time the sun rose, I knew what I had to do. This wasn't just about her affair. It wasn't about the man she'd been sneaking off to see or the lies she'd told me. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my future. I wasn't going to let her twist this into a story about her unhappiness or her needs. This wasn't her story to tell anymore. It was mine. I reached for my laptop and began drafting a letter. Not to her, but to myself. A promise to move forward, to let go of the weight of her betrayal, and to build a life that didn't include her lies. By the time her car pulled into the driveway that afternoon, the decision had already been made. The suitcase sat waiting for her on the porch, next to an envelope containing the final piece of communication I would ever offer her. She stepped out of the car, her face a mixture of exhaustion and simmering anger. When she saw her suitcase, her pace faltered, her expression shifting to confusion, then panic. "What is this?" she demanded, standing at the door, the envelope in her hand. I didn't bother inviting her inside. This was no longer her home. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, and kept my voice steady. "It's over," I said simply. She gaped at me, her mask of indignation slipping to reveal the fear underneath. "You can't just end things like this. We need to talk." "We've already talked," I interrupted, my tone cold and unyielding. "You've said everything you needed to say, and so have I. Now it's time for you to leave." Her hands trembled as she clutched the envelope. "You're overreacting. You're throwing away everything we've built together because of one mistake." "One mistake," I said, my voice rising despite my resolve to remain calm. "This wasn't one mistake. It was months, years, of lying, sneaking around, and treating me like I was nothing more than a safety net while you played house with someone else." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't waver. "I don't care what excuses you've told yourself to justify this. I deserve better than this, better than you." Her tears spilled over, and for a moment, she looked genuinely broken. "I was lost," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I didn't know how to fix us. I didn't want this to happen, but you made it happen," I snapped, cutting her off. "You made the choice every step of the way. You could have talked to me, fought for us, but instead, you lied, over and over again. And now, you're trying to play the victim? No. You don't get to rewrite this story." She opened the envelope with trembling hands, her eyes scanning the neatly typed note inside. "I know everything. You've betrayed me in ways I can't forgive or forget. Your actions have made it clear that this marriage means nothing to you. I'm done letting you rewrite the truth. Don't contact me again. Goodbye." Asterisk. When she looked up at me, her face was pale, her lips trembling. "You don't mean this," she said weakly. "I do." My voice was firm, resolute. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. You'll hear from them soon." She staggered back, clutching the envelope as though it were a lifeline. "We can fix this. Please, we can fix this." "No, you broke this," I said, stepping back inside and closing the door. "And now it's over." For the first time in months, I felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation. Peace. The days that followed were a blur of legal paperwork, awkward conversations with mutual friends, and the gradual process of untangling a life we'd spent years building together. But through it all, I stood firm. I didn't let her guilt trips or half-hearted apologies sway me. I didn't let her rewrite the narrative to make herself the victim. She tried, of course. She told her friends and family that I'd overreacted, that I hadn't given her a chance to explain. But the evidence I'd gathered spoke for itself. Anyone who asked for the truth received it, unvarnished and undeniable. It wasn't easy, rebuilding my life after everything fell apart. But it was worth it. I moved to a new city, started fresh, and rediscovered the version of myself I'd lost somewhere along the way. I surrounded myself with people who valued honesty and loyalty, who reminded me what it meant to be loved without conditions or caveats. As for her, I don't know where she is now, and I don't care. Her truth no longer defines my reality. Sometimes, the hardest decision is the one that sets you free. Would you have walked away quietly like I did, or would you have made her face the truth in front of everyone?